So, yeah, so why have we gone there? What I was going to do is give you a kind of very quick rundown of where the trace fits in, and then see whether this text actually reflects that. So we've talked a lot about ambient attribution being the if you do work, then it's recorded against you, and if someone else wants to use that, then crack on, but you're due revenue from a dispersal event. As soon as they make money and they're using your stuff, then you're owed something, right? Now, what we haven't done up to this point is define exactly what that unit of contribution is. So we've defined the concept of contribution being, the work that you do. But in terms of objectifying that, we haven't put that down inside of a definition. So this definition of trace is intended to say, what is that unit? When we talk about contribution and you do things, what is that unit, which then becomes a tradable item that you can sell royalties to, you can trade off for other people. Perhaps you want to swap with someone else on their tradable units of traces. Perhaps you want to sell it, but it's an asset. Your work, the result of your work is an asset, and even if it's intangible, it's still an asset. And those assets can be combined with others and ring-fenced into something larger, like an app, say. But the smallest unit of attributable work, which is tradable, is the trace. So that's the kind of the very quick run through.
Okay. Still pretty confused right now, but I'm gonna just have to kind of keep working at it until I can kind of get it around my head, because there's a lot going on there with a lot of collisions. So, gosh, where do I start? So, are we talking about like a trace being like the smallest unit of NFT on the chain, like a micro NFT?
I'm not sure what micro NFT is, but it's
let's say
similar to NFT.
let's say I bought a Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT, like I bought a whole NFT, right? Right, and I fractionized that down to shares, and everybody owned a share of the NFT. That would be a fractional ownership of an NFT. That would be like
right
in my head a micro NFT, right?
Yep.
So you would own a piece of an NFT, but not the whole thing.
Yep.
But this sounds like a whole unit. Like this is a unit of one, where it doesn't get divided by anything more than itself, right? So it's indivisible by anything else. It's the smallest unit we can measure for contribution. Is that what I'm hearing?
No. It's the you can fractionate it. You fractionate it through an attribution algorithm. So say if you created a trace was created for a piece of work, and that trace being an object has an attribution algorithm attached to that, and say 10 people worked on that, and even say 10 people worked on that, and then these others are owed it because of their various contributions, or even if you've sold a portion of that. So because it's an object and objects have attribution attached to it, you can fractionate it up to any level you want through attribution. But it's the trace itself is the object, the thing that you're talking about. So you can cut that down to as small a slice as you want, and you can sell those small slices and so on.
Sorry, that's what I meant. Like if I bought one Bored Ape Yacht Club NFT, that would be the trace, and then when I fractionize it, that would be attribution fractions that I get sent out to people, like micro NFTs, right? So we're talking about here is the single unit of contribution that can or may be split up into other attribution algorithms, right?
Single unit of contribution, but yes, otherwise yes.
All right, that's going to be really hard to measure objectively. I'm not sure if we can put metrics around that.
Yeah, and one of the things I think we still need to work through is so it's fairly easy if you were to trade traces through some kind of unit of currency. It's harder to trace. Namespace clash. It's harder to work through if it's a trade. So if you were to swap traces, for example, which is perfectly reasonable, or if you were to say, I'm going to alter the attribution for this trace, but in exchange for something other than a common currency, then it gets a little bit muddy. So there's work to be done about what's the common unit of currency. What we were talking about yesterday, I don't know if you got a chance to listen to the recording of Tom and I. What we're talking about is the market really sets the value of a trace. But that market is dealing in some kind of currency. As soon as you get to a trade, it gets murkier. So there's further work. There's further work to be done there. Oi! Settle.
Busy day today.
Sorry about this. But yes.
So
does that answer the question?
Not really, but yeah, I'm just gonna have to have a think because this is really important and very esoteric right now. So, and those aren't very compatible terms right at the moment.
Because we're quite self-referential in terms of the terms, and maybe that's the thing that's making it esoteric. But if I give, see if I can give an analogy. So, say if there was a project set up to pull together an album of 8 music tracks, and there was one band that was contracted to produce one of the tracks on that. So the event of their PR saying, we finished the track, do you want this on the album? The event that PR is accepted onto the main branch of the album is the event that the trace is generated. Before that, the fact that they've been working on the inside of Dreamcatcher is available, but it's not traced. But as soon as you do that, then you have an asset. Now, say if you wanted to sell the attribution for that one track and say, well, we're going to, this has been paid for 50% by this album, so 50% of the attribution for this trace, it goes to the album, but we also want to sell the rights to, I don't know, radio rights or something like that to someone else, and the attribution goes through there, because the attribution algo has logic inside of it that you can say, well, if there's a dispersal event, there's revenue coming in from this source, and it triggers against this logic, then it goes to that source. So you can sell the attribution of a trace, and you can build up, you can embed traces inside of other traces in exactly the same way. So it's kind of cascading attribution. I'm not sure that's going to make it any clearer, so I need to work on this explanation. But that, if you think about a trace as something that you can pull royalties down from, because there's been an event where it's been accepted. Prior to that, the fact that you've been building it up inside of the Dreamcatcher is still recorded, but the trace is the thing that you can then actually trade, sell royalties to, and so on. And you can sell it in its entirety, in which case that would be a change of governance. You can sell part of the royalties, radio rights, and so on, and that would be inside of attribution, and you'd actually still own that asset, that trace.
I mean, I kind of understand the periphery of all that, but I'm not quite sure if this is working as terms of a definition right now. So I'm going to have to have a think.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, because I kind of sprung it on you. But yeah, maybe that traces and ambient attribution should be the topic for the next call.
Sure.
Because those two,
Sure.
those
sure.
two.
I mean, I put a comment down here, like where my mindset is. Like I'm in terms of economics, the two types of economic schools that I subscribe to the most. First of all, is behavioral economics, because human behavior is far more unpredictable than economics can ever predict.
Yep.
And also the other one is I'm very much a proponent of demand side economics and not supply side economics. Supply side economics is a there be dragons exploitable system. So
yeah.
I prefer that's why I'm like thinking that, to me, like trace always comes down to maybe being some sort of demand side pull request, whether it's a pull request of the actual owner themselves, or a pull request in terms of, hey man, I need some work done, can somebody please do this? I mean, that would be a pull request of some type. But
yeah, no, that fits. That fits perfectly.
But I mean, I don't know if that encapsulates all scenarios right now, so I'd have to have a bit of a think to see. I mean, because you're skirting around security stuff, and that's kind of a big no-no as well. So I, I don't want the term securities entering the lexicon at all for anything.
Yeah, I'm not skilled in the art, and at some point we need advice on that one. I'm not sure it is. I'm
just saying that, like, okay, so if you were, I don't know if you saw my funding model.
No, I haven't. That came in overnight for me, so I haven't seen that yet. Yeah.
No, sorry. I mean, it's okay. I'm just saying that, like, I have distinct groups of people for a reason, because in that funding model, I want to keep certain cohorts away from each other, because some cohorts you might be able to distinguish them as a security otherwise. Mm-hmm. Like, these people are not securities, because if they put money into the Dreamcatcher, there's no expectations of return. Mm-hmm. You know, like so there's no expectations of shares. It passes the Howey test. It passes the smell test. Mm-hmm. And then also, if we were to, we don't offer shares, but if an investor were to show up, what we offer them is a promissory note of tokens, and that's it. That's all they get. They get a promissory note. Mm-hmm. And that also takes out that gives us a firewall away from the whole tokenized ICO sort of security law violation. Like, that becomes more decentralized, because now all they have is a piece of paper that says that they were promised some sort of phantom vaporware, right, and not any sort of realized profits, right? So there's zero expectation there. Whether the profits come in or not is okay. And then I had all those guys going into a DAO system, which was more of a foundation, or a trust, which was nonprofit. Mm-hmm. Again, no profit expectations there. And that's the treasury that controls the purse strings. The DAO votes on projects. Those projects are funded by the DAO. And if there's return, that's returned through the attribution accumulator algorithm that accumulates the attribution, which is then distributed back first to pay off the principal of whatever funding was given, and then goes to certain individuals based on what tranche they're in. There's a tranche of payment. So and that's about as close to securities as I'm ever going to get, as I'll call it a tranche, because that's pretty much what it is. So the first payments go to the whoever put in the most risk, and those are probably going to be the governance token type situation. The next payment would go to people who are holding promissory notes, right? And the last people might be the people who are the people off the street who are providing liquidity, and that's it. And that would be how you get around funding a DAO without funding a DAO and being decentralized and still having a public-facing entity that agencies can interface with, and you and I with our DPL, how that DPL can be enforced through a entity, which is a company that would have some sort of office-facing PO box with a address and a telephone number.
Right. Yes.
You know what I mean? So when you read that model, that's what it is. Now, is that model correct? Probably not.
But yes, to an extent. What you just said is a perfectly reasonable and acceptable way of structuring a project inside of the Dreamcatcher. So if anyone wants to rock up and create an organization that effectively gets investment, funds work, owns the rights to traces, gets attribution in the future, everything you just described, that's still a project inside of the Dreamcatcher. So I think
you're right. That is a project inside the future. This is referring to bootstrap stuff. This is venture capital, or what I call vulture capitaling, investment type situations, like the meeting that Tom will have in a few days. Yeah. This is what that talks about. How do you bootstrap this sort of venture and still be decentralized and detached and pass security laws in most Western democracies? Like,
yes.
So that's that was that report.
I'll read the paper straight after this, and I'll put comments in Discord. But my view is largely reflected in that response I put into Rex Mondo when he was talking about what's the various structures of this one. I think actually there's an organization there is a kind of bootstrap organization that spins off the first block producer, the first app store, the first investor in projects, and so forth. But I'd be wary about getting investment for that organization as opposed to getting investment for these spin-off organizations, because then we get into the realm of exactly as you've described. And also, it's decentralized in the fact that there's no preference for our block producer. We just need one. There's no preference for our app store, but we do need one. There's no preference for the first project, but we do need one. And so we're kind of in the place of seeding it. And those.
I guess what I'm saying is that there still needs to be some sort of seed funding to do some of this stuff, right? And then run that stuff through the attribution and contribution calculators to get this thing up and running. I mean, somebody has to stand outside the car and actually crank the starter, right? So,
yes.
So, I mean, there's websites that need to be done. There's probably people that need to be hired, so, I mean, there is some sort of legal organization that has to be there somewhere to actually literally kickstart this thing. Now, whether or not that thing withers on the vine at some point and dissolves, that's fine. I'm just saying that probably will need to be there at some point, because government agencies need to have an address to send shit to. If you want to copy and trademark something, you can't say, well, hey man, we're on a DAO on the internet and here's my IP address. So I mean, those sort of things have to be done with that legal entity for now, at least. And so that's what I'm talking about. That LLC, that DAO, or whatever it is that we have, that's being that little tiny shell company. And I'm trying to use that term shell company, not the negative way, pejorative way, but the actual the physical way. We want to be a thin layer of just legal support, the small support possible, so that it can function as some sort of firewall to the legal side of the real world, and that's it.
Yeah, I agree. I guess the only thing I was saying is, because the question was, is that about right? And I said, well, it's almost right. The thing I'd be arguing, and we there'll be counter arguments and so on, and we need to work through this. But from my point of view, I think that thin layer of bootstrapping that says, well, who owns the trademark for Dreamcatcher, for example? Well, exactly. Having that thin layer, but without investment into that thin layer, and in order to fund that, actually, we're using the Dreamcatcher in order to generate revenue in the same way as everyone else. There is some that flows back in order to make that actually practical. But the important thing is, ultimately, we want that thin layer to be permissionless in terms of an entirely decentralized company. So people can go and turn up to a potential contract with an outside company, random bin collection company, whatever, and say, like, I'm working with the Dreamcatcher. That should be permissionless. So it's not an overarching body. The only overarching thing really is who has the keys to the main branch of the code, and even then being aware that someone else could fork that. And so there'll be market forces about the different forks and what becomes popular and what doesn't. But as soon as we've got those keys are really the key to getting the Dreamcatcher available as a system. As soon as we do that, we run up organizations, DAOs on that for these different things, and then that keeps the lights on. And then that gives a target for specifically what that DAO is doing, as opposed to the overarching thing. So, but I think this is a conversation we'll probably have to go. I'm sure there'll be a lot of back and forth, but that's my view. Is there's no one overarching DAO other than the minimum that we can do to actually bootstrap up, and that overarching DAO doesn't actually accept investment. The investment, if it comes into specific organizations that run inside of the Dreamcatcher in exactly the same way as everyone else.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, I would say that, yeah, for the most part. I mean, now happiness would be that we had the Dreamcatcher up and running and we started all this in the Dreamcatcher. That would be the happy spot. But yeah, I think practicality is that I think we're going to see some collision where reality is going to hit us and we have to do certain things. Like, I mean, there's just going to be some certain reality practicalities that are going to have to present themselves as being
Oh, for sure.
stakes that we have to smash into the ground, and we can't do that with a DAO yet because we don't have the infrastructure set up to do it. So we're going to be in this chicken and egg sort of catch-22 where we have to have a thin, some sort of thin shell sitting there.
I think the reality is going to be much muddier and dirtier than what we'd
right,
like.
So all I'm saying, when you read the diagram in the description, just remember this has got muddy reality written all over it. This is why it's written this way, because if people start getting wind of this and they want to invest, they will want to invest. And if we don't have a Dreamcatcher up and running to do this sort of investment influx, we might have to come up with a stopgap until such a time that we can get the Dreamcatcher. And we may need to do this much to get the Dreamcatcher up and running so that we can finally turn around and tell them that your money's now in the DAO and all your attributions being thing, and we're dissolving this organization now. We're all voting to cancel it. You know what I mean? So there's no more tokens.
It's very possible. As you say, the ideal is probably a fair gap over what we're actually finding. I mean, the ideal would be we're all independently wealthy already. We're doing this out of the goodness of one heart. We're going to build the Dreamcatcher, throw it out there to the world to use, and then we're going to only work inside of the Dreamcatcher. That would be the ideal. Now, the practicality is probably going to be far muddier than that. But yeah, I think we do it on a case-by-case basis, but I think it's important to have that head mark towards the ideal, even if we don't get it, is there shouldn't be an overarching organization that actually, controls this.
I mean, I don't want one, but I would like to put a time bomb on something like that. Is what I'm saying. Like, so what I'm saying is that
disposable. You've got 1 year, and then automatically.
Well, like I said before, like flash DAOs. So basically, what I foresee is that this DAO doesn't last very long. It's got a ticking time clock on it. It's got a difficulty bomb somewhere in there. And the governance tokens are only there to help vote on certain projects that we think are best fit our needs. Like we need an AMM, or we need this, or we need that. Things that are critical to function for the system. Those are and so when we're farming out these contracts, these funding contracts, we're not funding them out just willy-nilly because we think that someone's going to build a better laser beam or something. We're looking for people who are skilled enough to and want to start a small mini DAO that will start the AMM, that will do this, that will do that are all critical features. The App Store, because we don't want to do that, right? We don't. Yeah. That's not what we want.
If someone if someone dropped out of the blue sky right now and said, for some reason we've noticed what you're doing, God knows how, and we want to build the first App Store, it's like absolutely fantastic. Crack on, and you get all the attribution from that. Boom, off you go.
No, I foresee a situation where we may have a purse or a treasury, and then we have these people over here who are willing to do this work, and we know they can do this work. And we may need to fund that through a governance mechanism, through a firewall, where they get that funding, and then the attribution split or the contract set up where that shit comes back to the DAO to pay off the funding. But then at some point, the difficulty bomb hits, and the attribution is no longer part of the Dreamcatcher core DAO, but part of maybe some sort of other structure, like in the smart contract.
I see what you're saying.
So at some point, everything wound down to the point where the DAO is defunct. You can have all the governance tokens you want when you're voting. There's nothing to vote on anymore. There's nothing there. So tokens don't mean shit. The tokens were there for a brief period of time, and they were worth something for voting on strategic, critical partnership, right? And that's it. That's what we cared about. And then as soon as those partnerships were done and all the deliverables were met, everything, we just hit the kill switch, and it's all fucking gone.
Yeah, no, that's persuasive. I think you're right. I think you're right.
So anyways, that's my Mad Max version of that. So my anarchist version of that. This is me going full libertarian. So
well, there's plan B where we go into a major bank heist and then use those funds.
Contract auditing, I'm working on it. Seems the smart contract heists are way easier to pull off nowadays.
Yeah, I think you're probably right, because it's going to get to a point where actually, in order to build up fast enough, we're going to need to be spending money. And Tom's been spending his own cash out of his own wad out of this for years, and a non-insignificant sum. But there was no DAO around it and so on. Basically, he's turned up because he wants it to be there. And on my own part, I've been doing kind of sweat investment in the same way, but without a DAO, just because we both want this to be here. And you're here right now under the same terms. But I think if we were to actually try and engage more people, I think we'll quite quickly run out of smart people who get the idea and really want to effectively spend their own cash or time doing it without something. And
Right.
and in order to do the core utility items on that, even though those are likely to be the highest paying bits of work that's going to be ever done inside the Dreamcatcher, it's going to be the first to do the core utilities that everyone goes back to. They're going to be, massively valuable. But we can't assume people will see that and turn up and do it under their own steam. So there's going to need to be something.
Right.
So I think I'm persuaded by your argument. Yeah.
Anyway, I just wanted to give you a heads up on why it is what it is. It's not perfect, and it's not supposed to be perfect. It's just supposed to be a stopgap to fill a need temporarily until everything's up and running, and we're working in a steady state fashion where we're all happy and everything's tested and verified, and there's no like funds drained or SAFU issues or something like that where we have to step in with the DAO and maybe put a stopgap in, or I'm just foreseeing certain scenarios where this sort of organization would be very helpful to assuage people's fears or problems, because there's going to be a lot of people who just won't buy into this without some sort of organization, because that's just how some people are wired. They want to be part of a team and
if nothing else, one of the major gaps that I see is quite difficult to attribute is to go out and prophesize. So marketing spend on this one is quite difficult to grab into a trace, for example.
I don't think it's utterly difficult to do. I just think that we just need to understand how to capture it better is all. If people are posting stuff on websites that can be tracked and hashed and whatnot and gone back to something, and we see that this person's
we could crawl Reddit, and then any positive stuff said about Dreamcatcher, we could give them because you can get negative attribution. But anyway, basically any mention. You're right. There's ways to do that. Yeah. So that was just an example. That was just an example of the ephemeral stuff that is necessary to bootstrap at the start.
Right. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on that.
No, it's good.
I'm just trying to give Tom all the tools he needs in order to talk to investors, because I don't know what these investors would have in any sort of expectations. Because first of all, he's having these conversations, I'm not. So I don't know what their mindsets are. But, they tend to be greedy. So,
Yeah, they tend to be black and white, don't they? It's like, I'm going to give you this cash.
Unless you find a widow that was want to be altruistic and give away her late husband's fortune, it's usually pretty much greedy guys that show up at the door and go, "Oh my God, I see a way to do this and make a lot of money." So, I don't want to dissuade that, but I don't want it to be the end all be all of the system.
Yeah, you can't fail waiting on the waiting on the patron. If we just wait on a patron, that's going to be problematic.
I don't want to go into that event horizon of fucking VC funding again. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I agree. All right, what time do we have? So is there anything else you want to go through today before we pick up on Monday?
No, I'm fine. Is there anything you need to go through?
I would just so what I'm going to be doing then, I'm going to tidy up the last bits of the DPL. I might start to spin out documents that would make more sense in terms of legal, so make it clear where there's guidance and clear where actually we've gone through. But I think we're in a good place. In fact, I'm pretty confident we are. As I've been saying the last couple of calls, the thing that I'm really keen to do is to get back in amongst the dictionary. So we've done the DPL and we've created a few more definitions and so on. It's vital that the dictionary actually is coherent and correct with that. and even to the point of perhaps pulling out the definitions so we have one place for a definition, we don't duplicate any. So there's a whole bunch of work I want to go through in the dictionary. And also the conversations with you been incredibly useful because it's just been Tom and I for so long, and there's even through Tracy's and the fact that ambient attribution we kind of missed because it was in a previous document and so on, is really helpful to pull that all together. So my next work is going to be inside the dictionary. And that,
I did put while you're away, I did put an attribution comment as well under attribution, because I kind of split it up into 3 different types of attribution. So there could be more. I just thought of 3 at the moment. So so basically, ambient being like waiting to be claimed, live is active attribution would be like a live real-time attribution, like something that's is like not defunct or not dead or something like that. And postpone attribution, like, so there's a delegate attribution that came up today with the call with Tom, where there's a feature inside the Dreamcatcher. I mean, obviously you probably know about it. I didn't know about it. I just found out about today that there's a delegate feature inside the Dreamcatcher where people can put a stop hold on the attribution until it hits a critical mass where they feel it's worth the payout. So that would be like a delegate attribution action, an event. So those people could, and that would probably have to be a function somewhere that says that delegate attribution could happen, and there's a stop sign, and it says that it hasn't crossed my threshold, so therefore I'm not letting go of these funds. However, somebody upstream who has a lot of money could release those funds if they wanted to pay the gas. So,
right,
all that stuff, and that can everybody else free attribution upstream and downstream or whatnot. So, anyways, I just put the term delegate in there just to kind of differentiate that there's a stop sign system in there somewhere. Where it can hold it.
Yeah, good.
That's about it.
Yeah, I think
that's about all I got.
Yeah, I'm good as well. And apologies for the randomness of paramedics turning up and dogs turning up and real life turning up.
That's the nature of the position, right? That's what it is. It's always random.
Right.
I mean, if we could predict this type of stuff, we wouldn't need paramedics.
That's pretty good.
Right.
Very good point. Right. I'll get something in the calendar now. So we've got that. Let's talk on Monday.
Okay.
But as always, been a pleasure.
Yeah, man.